Hi, this is Marlene Dinarius here from Latinum, and this video I'm going to go through one of the lessons from the Oral Latin Composition course, which I have at Patreon. This is a more advanced course than the very easy Latin Oral Composition course, which is also at Patreon. The material that this course is based on is that of a Latin course developed by Prendergast in the 1900s. Now this course really requires modern technology to deliver it, and so what I have done is I've re-engineered it so that it can be used as an audio course for self-learning. And in this video, for that is what this is, it's a video, I'm going to go through one of these lessons and show you how it works. So to start with, there's no need to learn vocabulary. So I have no expectation at all that you are going to sit down and learn vocabulary material. Although if you do use my course, then there is an enormous amount to help you learn vocabulary in a more natural way. For example, the work of Comenius and so on. And if you're at a higher level of Pexenfelder, the Apparatus Eruditionis. But in this course, I'm not asking you to learn vocabulary. Every single time a word is used, it is first introduced and translated. Because the grammar section is hard enough as it is without increasing your cognitive load to the extent that you can't actually do the material and do the task that's demanded of you. And the words will learn themselves through the immense amount of repetition. So by the end of one of the lessons, by the time you have mastered it, you will know the vocabulary in that lesson, without a doubt. Let us go on and begin. So, vulnero, I wound, vulneras, you wound, vulnerare, to wound. He wounded, vulneravit. And then I test you using a bell. Now sometimes, in this case I've given the vulneravit, he wounded, but sometimes I will not give that in the first instance. I will test it directly, and then if you don't know it, you will know it for the second run through, because it will take a few run throughs each lesson until you are able to do it at the requisite speed. So what I do is I give the English, for example here, he wounded, and I ring a bell and pause. I pause what I think is long enough for you to produce the Latin. If you need more time, then you press your own pause button and you extend the time you need. But if you can't produce the Latin in the time I've given, then you don't know the lesson well enough and you should repeat it until you can. Hic servus, this slave, huius servi, of this slave, masculini generis, of masculine, of gender. That's a very literal rendering, of course, a rendering of masculine gender. But here we're trying to learn a bit of grammar at the same time. So repeating this material is useful. Just as they did in the Middle Ages, they taught basic Latin grammar by using basic Latin to teach the grammar, which is extremely repetitive, but you do end up learning the forms. The slave wounded. Servus vulneravit. Ne means so that not, or in order that not. He wounded so that he not tell. Vulneravit ne narraret. Notice here that the form of what's going on, you'll see in a moment why it's important. Hic dominus, this master, huius domini of this master, masculini generis, of masculine, of gender. The slave wounded. Servus vulneravit. The slave wounded so that he not tell the master. Servus vulneravit, ne domino narraret. Literally, that he not tell to the master. Hic vicinus, this neighbor, huius vicini, of this neighbor, masculini generis. The slave wounded the neighbor. Servus vicinum vulneravit. The slave wounded the neighbor so that he not tell the master. Servus vicinum vulneravit, ne domino narraret. Hicca, haeca, hocca, meaning this. He wounded, so that he not tell this to the master. Vulneravit, ne hoc domino narraret. The slave wounded, so that he not tell this to the master. Servus vulneravit, ne hoc domino narraret. The slave wounded the neighbor, so that he not tell this to the master. Servus vicinum vulneravit, ne hoc domino narraret. Hic gladius, this sword, huius gladii, of this sword. Masculini generis, of masculine, of gender. The slave wounded with a sword. Servus gladio vulneravit. The slave wounded the neighbor with a sword. Servus vicinum gladio vulneravit. The slave wounded the neighbor with a sword, so that he not tell this to the master. Servus vicinum gladio vulneravit, ne hoc domino narraret. Tua is your, feminine, tuus, your, masculine, tuum, your, neuter, all these three, in the nominative case. The slave wounded the neighbor with your sword. Servus vicinum gladio tuo vulneravit. He wounded with your sword. Gladio tuo vulneravit. The slave wounded the neighbor with your sword, so that he not tell the master. Servus vicinum gladio tuo vulneravit, ne domino narraret. The slave wounded the neighbor with your sword, so that he not tell this to the master. servus vicinum gladiator vulneravit, ne hoc domino narraret. So that's the end of the lesson, and as you can see, it's quite complex and quite a lot of grammatical material is contained within it. The sentences are deconstructed by myself in this case, rebuilt, and then of course presented in this format. So what in essence is happening is that it's an enormous number of micro tests with immediate feedback, and this is extremely useful for language learning. And also you have a very clear goal, which is to master the lesson. So having this very clear goal helps you stay concentrated and on task, because all you have to do is say, okay, I'm doing this lesson, I can relax about the vocabulary and concentrate on getting the form of the Latin correct, and I know exactly what is expected of me for this lesson. And so that helps with concentration and so on and so forth. Because with language learning, staying on task is often very difficult, and this is why people give up. So one advantage of this method of studying is that everything is chunked. Each lesson stands by itself, independently of all the others, although there is development. And so if you were to jump into one of the later lessons, although the vocabulary would be provided, you might find yourself struggling a little bit with the complexity of the grammatical forms. But you could always run through the lesson once to familiarize yourself with it, and then of course go back and repeat until you know. So that is a sample lesson from the Oral Latin Composition course. It's hosted at Patreon, so you can find Latinum at Patreon and find the course there. I hope you found that useful.